for the future of Catholic social teaching, there are a number of challenges. So one of them is, how do we continue to address economic reality? For example, now increasingly the growing inequality that exists in this country and in other countries as well, but terribly in this country. And Catholic social teaching has spoken out about it. Pope Francis is already speaking out about it, et cetera. And so that's a cutting edge issue. We have other, in terms of our peace tradition, which I haven't talked much about in terms of the Catholic social tradition, we had two major traditions in the Catholic peace tradition, one of which was the pacifist tradition, which was you don't resort to violence for any purpose, even to defend oneself and one's family, in its pure form. And we have always had a Catholic, strong Catholic pacifist tradition going back to early Christians who refused to serve in the Roman army. We've had a second tradition called the just war theory, or the just war tradition, better called the justifiable war tradition, because war is never a good. It's always a moral evil. It's always an evil, but it's justifiable in that tradition under certain circumstances. And it had two components. What was called jus ad bellum, which was justice for going to war, which is one of the just reasons that you can go to war, justifiable reason. And the other was jus in bellum, justice in war, which is when you fight, aren't there some rules about how you fight? And namely, for example, that you don't attack civilian populations. That's a long-term traditional Catholic principle under the justifiable war tradition. Well, we've had both these traditions. After 1989 and the collapse of communism and the People's Revolution in the Philippines, in the writing of Pope John Paul II, there began to be a kind of strong leaning to the pacifist tradition. The realization being that modern wars are so destructive of everything, including civilian populations, as we've seen over and over again, whether it be Vietnam, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. We see the wars, and we see their damage to people, the civil war in Syria, whatever it may be. And so there was a growing edge to there should be no defensible wars, no justifiable wars. We never arrived at that point. So we've had both traditions operative. But the justifiable war tradition is the one that's more commonly looked at, for example, even in the war colleges and the training of military officers in the United States, they look at that tradition, which has a long history to it and has certain principles to it as well. That tradition now has to face more and more the ethnic uprising of peoples all over the world that really came with the collapse of first the empires, the British Empire, the French Empire, etc., the end of those empires in the 60s and the 70s, etc., and also the collapse of the Soviet Union. So you have more and more cases like Yugoslavia, where multiple peoples who were different had been cobbled together into one country, and then it broke apart, and everyone wanted independence. And as more and more people become conscious of their own ethnic identity, sometimes they want a separate ethnic state. How do we address those realities? You know, we went through this in a way in the United States with the Civil War. We fought a war to hold our country together. It wasn't ethnic, but there were different cultures in a sense, North and South. So that's a challenge that the tradition still faces. How do we deal with that? And there's still this question about the resort to arms at all. There was a great debate in the 70s, I think, between Dan Berrigan, representing the pacifist tradition, and some of the folks in Nicaragua, etc., who were allied with the people's revolutions there, who were arguing for armed revolution, and the argument being that the argument can be made that when you have an armed revolution of some sort, you simply get another dictator who enforces a new form of injustice with weapons, etc. And so there's a whole question there that we still have to face about the use of arms. When is revolution justifiable? And we're seeing it all over the world, etc. So that's a whole nother challenge that Catholic social teaching still faces. You know, how do you articulate, how do you carry our principles forward into a different, complicated world?